Good afternoon. I'm excited to host my second virtual town hall as your 26th Commandant. I'm joined by Master Chief Vanderhaden, our 13th Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, and Ms. Michelle Godfrey, Director of Civilian Human Resources. Continue to submit questions in the comments section below, and we'll try to answer as many as we can today. Before we begin, though, I'd like to extend my heartfelt condolences to the victims and to all those affected by the mass shootings over the weekend in El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio. We must work together to prevent targeted violence through intervention and collaboration within the Coast Guard, the Department, and the communities in which we serve. This hits particularly close to home as we have service members permanently stationed and deployed in El Paso conducting important operations. I'm thankful to report they are all safe. Violence inspired by any ideology has no place in the United States. Attacks such as what we observed this weekend not only end lives, they also degrade our humanity and integrity of our national values. Now, shifting gears, yesterday on Sunday, we celebrated our 229th birthday. It has been a great year for the Coast Guard. You have delivered excellence when the nation has called. Your leadership team has been identifying areas for improvement and in implementing policies that keep you always ready, such as surge staffing for new parents. As I said at the State of the Coast Guard address, I am committed to building a more inclusive organization where all of our members are respected and empowered. As part of that effort, I'm pleased to unveil modernized weight and tattoo policies. These revised policies will allow more high-qualified candidates to join our service, will ensure all of our members are treated with dignity, and will align us more closely with our fellow military services while maintaining our unique image and standards as Coast Guard men and women. The recently completed Women's Retention Study revealed that the weight program disproportionately impacted our women in uniform. In response, we've spent the last 4 months developing a body composition pilot program that will better serve our Coast Guard. It includes additional opportunities to demonstrate compliance, including a new abdominal circumference measurement, a fitness test, and more actively engages our medical professionals in this critical health assessment. Our tattoo policy, of great interest to many members, is also being updated. While maintaining a sharp and professional military appearance, our new policy will allow limited tattoos on members' hands and chests up to the collar of a crew neck t-shirt. Admiral McAllister, our Deputy Commandant for Mission Support, will send an all-hands email and website with details on the body composition pilot program later today, followed by the new tattoo policy at the end of August. Master Chief Vanderhaden, anything to add?
Yes, Admiral. As I travel around the Coast Guard, I'm inspired by our amazing people. As you often say, demand for Coast Guard services has never been higher, and our people are stepping up to answer the call. We're always looking to improve the readiness and enhance retention, and to those ends, I have exciting news about updates to our uniforms and grooming standards. We will transition from our current ODU to the Navy's Type 3 made in our current ODU blue material. And in addition, we will offer a lightweight, hot weather version of our ODU. We have updated our uniform policies and grooming standards in response to ideas we've received from the field. I know we've received some questions in advance, which will allow me to get into a little more detail. But Admiral, as you know, the best ideas come from the fleet. So continue to send in your suggestions. Thank you, Admiral.
Thank you, Master Chief. Ms. Godfrey, I understand you also have some exciting civilian updates as well today.
I do. Good afternoon, Admiral, Master Chief. I'm honored to join you today to highlight the valued contributions of our civilian workforce. The civilian women and men who work every day around the globe to conduct or support Coast Guard missions are essential to our service's success. That's why I'm excited to offer 2 quick updates that show how we're investing in our civilian workforce. First, we've enhanced our Civilian Awards Recognition Program to honor the many contributions of our civilian teammates. The program includes a Civilian Service Commendation Medal, expansion of the Civilian Employee of the Year initiative, and an increase in the amount of the on-the-spot cash awards to $500. I know supervisors will be excited because the on-the-spot cash awards are a great way to recognize our civilians and their exceptional accomplishments. And second, the new Civilian Career Management Team is up and running at ForceCom. They are focused on civilian professional development to broaden opportunities for civilians, and I can take questions about their work today if you have them. Admiral, thank you so much for making our civilian workforce a priority and resourcing this team, which is so important. And thank you again for inviting me to join you to participate in today's town hall.
Well, thank you, Ms. Godfrey. Thank you for representing our tremendous group of civilian employees.
Thank you.
So these changes were the direct result of input from the field, and it's our hope that these small steps will improve the lives of our members today and help recruit future qualified members for the Coast Guard of tomorrow. We're again today joined by Public Affairs Specialist Lumena Stewart, who's going to present us with your questions. PA2, you ready to get started?
I sure am. Thank
All
you,
right.
Admiral. If you are joining us on the USCG.mil through the live stream link, you can click Open Chat in the top right corner to submit questions. So let's get started.
Okay.
So the first question is for Admiral. This question is from Chief Warrant Officer Amelia Ponce. Good morning, Admiral. I would like to commend your actions to revamp the weight program. My question is, what is the goal of the program?
Well, Chief Warrant Officer Ponce, thanks for the question. So the new body composition program is an update. It's a pilot program to look at our current weight program. What we found was the weight program we had for many years has been disproportionately not serving our women colleagues well. We were discharging women that were non-compliant with the initial weigh-in and then the 2/3 body tape-in at a rate 3 times higher than their male counterparts. So we took I don't say completely holistic, but we took a fairly comprehensive view of the existing program, and we said, what do we got to do here based on the women's retention study, based on surveying of our colleagues in uniform? And we came back and said, we think we have an opportunity. We looked at what DOD was doing and benchmarked that. So now we have a new program, the pilot, for 1 year. You come in, you do your weigh-in. If you don't make the initial weigh-in, there's a couple alternative paths to compliance. There's an abdominal circumference measurement. DOD's been using that. That could be the first step. There's the traditional 2/3 taping, modified like we did last year to kind of get rid of that one taping procedure that was not really suitable for our female colleagues. Then the third path is a fitness test. So now you actually have 3 viable ways to comply with our body composition standards. We're going to run this pilot for 1 year, and at the end of the day, we'll have some data about how the abdominal circumference and the 2/3 tapes, how they compare, and I think we'll make a determined decision at that point about where we go forward. But again, this was in response to feedback through the women's retention study, from surveys with our men and women, that our system wasn't best serving our interests. So it's a modernized approach here under the premise of a pilot program.
So our second question is for the Master Chief. This question is from ET1 Sean Campbell. He is from Training Center Petaluma.
Okay.
Do we have an update on the possible change over to Type 3 uniforms? I appreciate your time and thank you.
Thank you. Sean, we're gonna transition to the Navy Type 3 uniform. It's going to be made, the initial ones are going to be made out of the same blue material that we have right now. We'll also produce a hot weather version, which will be more breathable and more moisture wicking. Some of the changes are going to be, there'll be a rank tab as opposed to putting it on the collar. The collar will be a Mandarin style collar, which will be quicker for battle dress. We'll have a American flag and a Coast Guard ensign on the sleeve, and then we will have there's a couple extra pockets. The pants are self-blousing. That means they already have a tie in the bottom, so you don't need your blousing straps. And we're going to be joining on to the Navy contract, so we should be able to produce a lot of these uniforms. And so source of supply should be really steady and hopefully bring the cost down for this. It's going to be a phased-in approach, so don't go throwing your ODUs away. Make sure you take care of your ODUs and continue to keep them serviceable. We'll start with basic training in the academy, and we'll start to put those folks into these new Type 3s first, and then we'll make them available to the field as we start to build up our inventory.
I'm looking forward to see these new uniforms. The third question is from Ms. Godfrey. This question is from Katie B. I applaud the Coast Guard for its new parental leave policies, but federal civilians still don't have paid parental leave available to them. What can the Coast Guard do to better make our civilian workforce ready after the birth of a new child?
Well, that's a great question. And so we know that Congress has introduced 12 weeks of paid leave for federal employees, but that legislation has not yet been finalized. So what we have in the interim right now is leave under the Family Medical and Leave Act. That authorizes 12 weeks of leave for federal employees for maternity purposes and adoption purposes. And that leave can be a combination of annual leave, sick leave, and leave without pay. We also have workplace flexibilities that include telework and alternative work schedules that aid in the transition back into the work status.
And that applies for adoption
Yes,
as well,
it
correct?
does. Yes.
Admiral, this question is from both Chief Jason Gazzillo and Senior Chief Daniel Sunday. They have questions regarding the future of the 87-foot patrol boat fleet. Particularly, what's the timeline and proposed amount of cutters to be decommissioned? And how will it affect the assignment and advancement of officers in charge for Master Chief and Senior Chief bosun mates?
Well, thanks, Lumani, and Senior Chief and Chief, thanks for the question. I suspect they're both bosun mates here. So there is talk about decommissioning some finite number of 87-foot patrol boats. As we look at, the fleet, we're building out a domestic fleet of 58 FRCs. We've got, 70-plus 87-footers. We're looking at, tough choices as we fit within a DHS budget top line. What we're looking to do is some finite number of 87s will come out of service likely here in the next, probably next 18 months or so. We're going to create opportunities on fast response cutters, though, for Senior Chief bosun mates. 4 fast response cutters will be commanded by Chief Warrant Officer bosuns. XPOs on there will be Senior Chief bosun mates. So there's almost a match here. I don't think the number of 87s coming out of service is much bigger than a half dozen or so. This does not connotate to any real difference of approaching about how we're looking at E8 assignments in the bosun mate ranks today here. But I think the numbers will be a fairly modest set of puts and takes there, and there will be some new opportunities aboard the fast response cutters that didn't exist today for Senior Chief bosuns.
That sounds like some great news for them. Admiral, this is another question for you. This is a question from Masty.
Okay.
What does the future of the polar region look like for the What does the future of the polar region look like for coasties? Should I start buying up real estate in Prudhoe Bay?
So I appreciate the tongue-in-cheek humor there. A little bit the future for the Arctic and the high latitudes, I think, looks a little bit like it does today. We're clearly excited. In April, we got monies from the Congress, supported by the administration, for a replacement for our heavy icebreaker, the Polar Star. So this is going to be the Polar Security class of cutters. We're in the detailed design phase right now. I think the future in the Arctic is probably going to remain sea-based for the foreseeable future. So we'll send these large breakers to do work up there. Right now we're doing forward operating locations for some air support, some small boat support in Kotzebue. I was up there last week. So I think it'll be an FOL, forward operating location, and a sea-based approach for the foreseeable future. So I would tell Massey to probably sit on his investment dollars for a little bit yet here, but what I'm excited about is increased capability in the high latitudes by the Coast Guard in a couple of years. We've been a decade plus getting after this first heavy icebreaker, what we're calling the Polar Security Cutter. I've adopted a 6-3-1 strategy. So this is monies for the first. We talk about 6 breakers total, 3 of them being heavy or Polar Security Cutter, 1 now. We're sort of off to the 1 now, the now. And then the good news is the conversation here in Washington, both within the administration and Capitol Hill, is about how fast can you build those icebreakers. So we're in a different place, but continued sea basing and forward operating locations for the near-term future.
In acquisitions, I work with that team, and they're pretty busy.
They're busy and they're doing some great things, and I'm really excited. I think we're going to build a great heavy icebreaker, this Polar Security class. It's exciting stuff.
Sure is. This next question is for Master Chief. This comes from ME3 Groter. I have heard rumors about the grooming standards being changed. I request to know if there's any truth to these rumors, and if so, what might the new regulations look like?
We are updating the grooming standards. It's more for women than it is for men. We're looking at some of the hair standards to provide some flexibility with hair. We're going to increase the bulk to 3.5 inches. We're going to increase the women's bun size from to 4 inches, extending from the scalp and not wider than the back of your head. And we're going to allow ponytails that don't extend past the collar. All these are, just trying to help women have some flexibility in their hairstyles, especially when they're out of uniform. We're going to look at some fingernail polish, maybe expanding a little bit of the color in fingernail polish. But at the end of the day, we really want to maintain our high standards, our high uniform standards. I don't see, there's not a lot going on right now in terms of men's grooming standards.
Thank you, Master Chief. This next question is for Ms. Godfrey. From Ms. Susan Matsudo. She expresses concerns regarding training for supervisors of civilians. She wants to know if the Coast Guard will bring back in-person training for civilian supervisors that focuses on the basics of civilian career management.
So currently we do have a 40-hour online training course for supervisors of civilians, along with a Tier 2 training course that is a 1-week in-person session. But we are working with FORCECOM right now on a request for analysis of those training courses, as well as a request for development of a new course. We don't know what that course will look like yet, but we are in the planning stages for that. We also, in the interim, are providing by my office some informational sessions, virtual information sessions to supervisors. So far we've done one on hiring authorities, we've had a session on performance management and awards, and we have some upcoming sessions on employee and labor relations and leadership development. And in addition to that, we issue to supervisors advisory notices from civilian HR, and they provide just-in-time information to supervisors to help them with their duties as supervisors of civilians.
So it looks like there's a lot of resources out there
Yes,
for them. This next question is for the Master Chief from ET2 White. Is there any talk of getting rid of higher tenure?
Well, ET2, every year we look at the higher tenure professional growth points, and we need to provide advancement opportunities for our people. The military structure is based upon flow and the ability for folks to move up in the organization, and we work off an apprentice journeyman master model to where we grow folks. So the reason we have higher tenure is because we have pretty good retention, and we need to be able to provide opportunities for people to move up in the organization. So we look at it every year. One thing I would encourage you to do, especially in ET and a critical rating, is to, if you're coming up on your professional growth point, ask for a waiver. We have a robust waiver process. The higher tenure panel meets every year, and we put a lot of thought and effort into waivers and how we give waivers.
Thank you, Master Chief. This next question is for the Admiral. This question is from Petty Officer Adm Ahmad. Can we scrap missile or revamp it? A lot of our Coast Guard intel is missile data driven. So if we want to move towards intel driven ops, we 100% need to take a hard look at our systems.
Well, that's a great question, and it doesn't have a great answer at this point, but I think there's some good energy afoot here. You know, we're working on some mobility solutions to actually take missile to the waterfront here for the end users, you know, for our folks in the marine safety community, for the folks in the boarding officer community here. We're not quite there, but we're getting close to actually having an iPad type application with a CAC reading capability. We've got to maintain, when you look at missile, that is critical to our law enforcement operations. So there's data integrity, there's security, and then there's the mobile piece of that. I think we're getting close. I talked to the CG6 Admiral Dermalian here recently on that, and there's just a lot of good energy. We fielded about 1,100 iPads last summer to sort of as a forcing mechanism to raise our game here in terms of fielding mobility to our, you know, bright young men and women on the front lines who live in an era that's empowered by mobility. So we're getting after it. We're not quite there yet, but we're on a good trajectory. You know, missile is important. You know, intelligence operations and missile, I would say that's kind of colluding a couple of terms. For intel operations, and we send a national security cutter downrange, we don't want to be mowing holes in the ocean like the early years of my career. We want to be sending that ship with 150 plus or minus sailors after specific targets with the end game capabilities to stop them. That's intelligence-driven operations. Missile's a bit of an enabling record-keeping system that allows us to track our allocation of finite, you know, capacity in terms of how we allocate hours, allows us to track data on vessels, on people. So I think the good news is we're focused on that. We're focused on C5I writ large. Mobility and missile is a subset of that. But I think we're going to do a missile light application in the not too distant future. So hang in there, and we'll keep the pressure on the team here to get that capability out in the hands of our frontline operators as soon as possible.
So it looks like we're going on the more modern route with the iPads.
We're on the catch-up route.
Catch-up
We're
route.
not quite on the modern edge yet, but we're trying to play some catch-up, Lumena.
I have another question for you, Admiral. This one is from the Coast Guard Auxiliary Flotilla 25-1 in D.C. How do you envision the auxiliary roles, missions, and training evolving to keep pace with the rapidly modernizing and evolving Coast Guard?
That's a great question. Our auxiliary end strength is down a little bit from yesteryear. We're north of 25,000. At one point, we're in the low to mid 30,000s. Our auxiliaries absolutely are critical to enabling the Coast Guard's ability to do our missions. Boating safety remains mission priority number one for the auxiliaries, teaching boating safety classes, being on the boat ramps in the marinas, life jacket wear by kids. That's absolutely a place where our other demands for missions has pulled some of our active attention away from that. One thing I'm very excited about, we made a commitment here last year when we came on board with the new leadership team, was to upgrade the AUX data system. Kind of back to the last question, we're actually taking AUX data to the cloud here. It's going to be our first cloud-based application. AUX data is the system that captures all the work of the auxiliary. So I see the auxiliary focused on boating safety. I see us putting a new AUX data system in their hands to help them monitor their whole portfolio of programs. Their contributions are in the tens of thousands of hours. The other challenge is there's so many skills in the auxiliary. We've got auxiliary docs that are doing orthopedics in our clinics. We have some that are coming in and helping doing filing. We have some that still have assets around the water. We have an AUX air program. So I would say more of the same for the auxiliary, better enabling functionality here with the new AUX data system that we're excited about. And that's actually a little bit of a learning laboratory for going cloud-based for the Coast Guard.
Thank you, Admiral. So this next question is for Master Chief. This question is from Michael Brooks. Has there been any discussion on advanced education counting towards enlisted advancement?
So, Michael, I would encourage everybody in the Coast Guard to be a lifelong learner. It's important that we are always working on our education. The advancement system needs to be as fair and equitable across the organization as we can possibly make it. And unfortunately, not everybody right now has the connectivity and the ability to take advanced education. So if we incorporated advanced education into the advancement system, we may not unintentionally disadvantage some folks who can't take advantage of advanced education right now. So keep learning, keep pursuing education when you can, and as we institute the advancement panels for E8 and E9, I'm sure that education will be a part of that.
Thank you, Master Chief. So we have another question for the Admiral.
Okay.
This question is from Lieutenant Matos. Will the Coast Guard continue to support the Southwest border operations? Is there a time period set forth to end mobilization of Coast Guard Reserve personnel for this operation?
Well, let me take the first question first. Yes, we will continue to support the Department of Homeland Security and the ongoing humanitarian crisis at the Southwest border. If you go back 16 years, 2003, when the department was created, sort of look at a parallel construct to the creation of the Department of Defense here back in the 40s. This was to synchronize the work of 22 different component agencies. We bring some capacity. We allow, with our 150 plus or minus folks that are on the Southwest border right now, about 25 doing frontline operations on the Rio Grande River or in the air over the river. The remainder are supporting Border Patrol and other partners down there. What our folks are doing is allowing those Border Patrol men and women to be on the front lines doing the work that they have the authorities to do. And we're doing a lot of support type functions there, from translation to meal prep to escorts to medical care to you name it. The Coasties are doing what Coasties do. They bring a bias to action and they're making a difference. The feedback from Secretary McAleenan is very appreciative of what the men and women are doing. They're not easy work. In terms of part two of that question about the reservists, we just got our first wave of reservists down there. I think we have a roadmap for reservists to continue to augment through the rest of the calendar year, and we'll see where we are. But I would say we are in the mission space until we basically get a signal that we're no longer needed down there, Lumena.
Okay, thank you, Admiral. So this question is for Ms. Godfrey from Donnie. What is the Coast Guard doing to reduce time to hire?
Well, my staff and I have been working very hard on reducing the time to hire. It's important to us and it is important to the Coast Guard. So the two areas that we're most focused on right now are the security part of the hiring process and then the upfront part of the hiring process. So for the security part, we're working with DCMS 34, the Office of Security, to look at ways to streamline the security process. And then for the upfront piece, we're working with various programs now to standardize position descriptions and vacancy announcements, which should then reduce the overall time to hire.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Godfrey.
Thank you.
So this next question is for Master Chief. This is from Seaman Bowie at Station Kauai. I'd like to know if A-school lists that are closed or have longer wait time could expand the number of instructors and classes to account for the higher number of non-rates wanting to attend. I'm looking forward to attending HS A-school, which has a 30-month wait list, but I'm unsure about that decision with the possibility of the A-school closing to applicants.
Well, as soon as your name goes on the list and you're accepted on the list, you can feel confident that you will get a spot at the school. So that's the first answer. The next answer, the reason we close A-school lists is because the wait list goes beyond 3 years. We've made a determination here, leadership has made a determination that being on an A-school list for more than 3 years is probably not good for your career. And so what we close and open A-school lists as the demand signal requires. We also, expanding the number of seats at an A-school would just mean we that doesn't necessarily, is not the reason why the list is at 3 years. The list goes to 3 years because we put people through A-school to fill vacancies that we need. In certain ratings, we have high retention in those ratings, and we just don't have a need for them at the A-school. We don't have a need to put people through the A-school. So we don't like closing A-school lists, but we do it because it's best for our members' career.
I waited for 4 years for my school, so I get it, but I took advantage of education and tuition assistance that we have.
And I applaud all the PAs that waited on an extended A-school list. Thank you.
It was worth the wait. So this next question is for Admiral from PA1 Manning. Admiral, the Coast Guard now authorizes a flexible work schedule for a year immediately following the birth or adoption of a child for all service members at the discretion of the CO or OINC. Can you give an example of what that schedule might look like?
Well, I think the question's a great question, Pastor Manning, and I appreciate that. We're trying to do a bunch of things that allow our members to be productive Coast Guard men and women and to be successful parents, whether that's single parents, whether that's dual family parents. And what we've done is surge staffing so that a mom can step out, give birth, not worry about the undue pressures that small units in particular, by being gone for an extended period of time, can maximize the maternity leave. We've got, so the reservists coming in there, policy where you don't have to go TAD for the year after you give birth. Specifically to the question, we've got two types of programs today. We have a compressed work week and we have a flexible work week. A compressed work week means, over the course of a 2 40-hour work week period, you might work 4 10-hour days each week. That gets you to your 40. You might work 5 8-hour days one week and 4 9-hour days the following week. But it's an amalgamation to allow you some ability to compress your schedule, maybe have a day or 2 days off in that 2-week period. The flexible schedule brings a little bit more. You can maybe deviate the time you report, the time you depart, how you work your lunch with a minimum 30-minute lunch period. So we're all about injecting some additional flexibility. Obviously, if you're an outlining unit, your officer in charge, your commanding officer, he or she has got to actually get the work that unit provides to the public that we serve done first and foremost. So there's got to be a conversation. I think really the successful way to approach this is sit down with your chain of command at your unit, articulate what your specific desires are, what your needs are, where you have some flex, see how that matches up with the officer in charge, the commanding officer's ability to offer you that flex, and hopefully we're off to the races to build a little bit more flexibility. And so, Petty Officer Manning, whoever it is, can be both successful in the workplace and both successful on the home front, particularly if that individual is a parent or part of a 2-parent household.
I could also see it helping with retention rate too.
I hope so. That is the purpose here. The purpose is particularly to allow, in this modern workforce where people have a lot of choices and unemployment's at historic lows, we want the Coast Guard to be an employer of choice. And to be an employer of choice, we've got to bring some modernized thinking to the equation. That's what all these programs are sort of targeted for, Lumena. Thanks.
Thank you, Admiral. So this question is from Ms. Godfrey from Chris Browning. Good afternoon. Currently, there are many great training opportunities for civilians. Is it likely that civilians will be afforded tuition assistance opportunities again?
So thank you very much for that question. At this point in time, we do not have funds for tuition assistance, but we are standing up, as I mentioned in our introductory remarks, the civilian career management team, and they are going to be focused on developing career paths and career mapping for the civilian workforce, and that's going to allow us to focus more on professional development. In addition, my staff and I are working on new Commandant instructions on rotational assignments and details that will also increase professional development for our civilians.
That sounds awesome. Thank you. Master Chief, this question is for you from John Huber. Good afternoon. Are there any plans of revising the current priority building, taking into account units who face a higher operational tempo who might be given a higher priority?
We every 3 years, PSC and EPM in particular convene a panel to look at assignment priorities. It's fairly new. We've only done it once so far, and I think that the third year is coming up pretty soon. It might even be next year that we're going to look at the assignment priorities and look at the units. We understand that missions change. You know, sometimes a unit may have been asked to do a lot, and so we need to look at assignment priorities more than just once every 10 years or so. So we have a process of every 3 years we will look at assignment priorities for units, and I think that's coming up pretty soon.
Thank you. Admiral, this question is from DC3 Duarte. Good afternoon, Admiral and Master Chief. Many structural buildings and housing infrastructure has been slowly decaying across the Coast Guard. My question is if the Coast Guard has put together a plan to remediate and update these aging buildings.
Well, DC3, thanks for the question. Thanks for the work you do out there with your hands here, you know, from building and repairing our old facilities to training your shipmates on damage control. We've got a $1.7 billion backlog on our infrastructure. That's a pretty big challenge to have here. What I would tell you is we're rolling the backlog, critical, you know, infrastructure backlog into the broader conversation about readiness. You know, we talk a lot about people readiness. We want men and women with the flexibility. Some of the previous questions we talked about were as an employer choice, we have people stay in the Coast Guard. The places people come to work are also important there. You know, the facilities. You know, to date we've been patching leaky roofs. You know, the only new infrastructure what we've been building is related to home porting of new assets. So when we site a fast response cutter, we build a weapons assistance, maintenance assistance team new building. We've been challenged to get after, you know, some of that backlog. So I think what I would say that's encouraging news is I believe the rhetoric, the conversation, the significant level of engagement the Master Chief, the Vice, and I and other senior leaders have had in Capitol Hill is starting to resonate. You know, we're seeing some projects listed off what we call, there's a running list beyond the budget we submit to the Congress every year. We now have a prioritized list of other things. Were there to be additional dollars, here's where we'd like it spent. We've got some additional funding here in the proposed House budget for 2020 that gets after Phase 2 housing for Kodiak. There's some things in there for pier upgrades. So I think we're starting to move that needle. You know, closing a $1.7 billion gap is not a small task, but we're going to continue to put a lot of energy into this conversation. The budget build here in the out years, actually we've put aside a bigger chunk of what we call 4X maintenance money to get after some of this infrastructure stuff. We recognize that we've got to take some ownership of this problem, and we've got to continue to make the need known to those that actually are responsible for putting, you know, money in the Coast Guard cup here to get after this. So we're going to continue to work on all fronts. I think DC3 will see some help. That said, we're looking for some innovative ideas to, you know, to kind of think about how we tackle some of these housing issues, how we look at that differently. So we're working with Admiral McAllister and the DCMS enterprise to make sure we're doing as best as we can by our folks that are in government-owned housing, and we're doing the best we can for our facilities. So I appreciate the question, DC3 Duterte. Thank you.
There's a lot of members that use Coast Guard housing, so that was a pretty good question.
Absolutely.
This is another question for you, Admiral, from James Dindal. What is the service doing to retain junior officers in the afloat community?
Well, I'll tell you one thing we're doing for the lieutenant junior grade, was it?
It does not say his.
Okay, well, I would tell you this. I think we're fielding some of the best platforms I've seen in 36 plus years of service. You know, if you look at the work that the national security cutters are doing each and every day downrange on Vector, you can't help but be impressed. If you look at a fast response cutter, that's a pretty tremendous platform. So I would say, you know, we're focused on going to sea being rewarding because of the nature of the work you do. We're trying to get platforms out there that accommodate both genders. We're trying to get platforms that bring the end game capabilities, whether you're working a rescue case, a law enforcement case, polar security cutters to go to the Arctic, where we haven't invested in more than 4 decades. I think there's a lot of good news on the waterfront in terms of the capabilities. You know, I would say as I survey the officer corps, as I look at the results from the 06 selection board, you know, soon the 05 selection board results will be out here. You know, I think our sailors are doing well. You know, as an officer, you have a primary career path. If you're a cutterman, you may go off to graduate school and do something in training and business and governmental affairs. There's a whole host of options, maybe a community in the C4I kind of world, C5I world. You know, what are we doing? We haven't refreshed in a while on sea duty attractiveness, but I will tell you sea pay is at the highest it's ever been, I think, in my career. But that said, it's probably time here in the coming 12, 18 months, again, to look at that sea duty attractiveness issue, dust that off a little bit, and make sure our men and women see, you know, going to sea as valued inside the lifelines of the service. So I've got that for action. We've had those conversations with the area commanders here recently. But I would tell you, I don't think the nature of our frontline work has ever been more rewarding than it is today. Whether you're in the ATON community, on capable ships, waterways commerce cutters are coming to the waterfront. Those will be mixed gender platforms. Today we got a fleet of 35 ships. Unless you're the officer in charge, you can't be a female serving afloat. So I think there's a lot of good opportunities around the corner, and there's a lot of good capabilities in waterfront. We didn't even talk about OPCs. That's going to be a fleet of 25 new ships. So hopefully there's a little bit there to keep you excited, and it's probably the right time to take a little bit of a look to see what we can do on the sea duty attractiveness front as well, Lumena.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank
I always love getting opportunities to deploy. Such a cool experience. Master Chief, this is from Michael Peters. Are there any plans to make EIPDRs more accessible to view, validate, and advertise their importance to junior personnel?
Yes, Michael. Hopefully on the next direct access refresh, we're going to make it so that you can see your own EIPDR. You won't be able to make changes to it, but at least you can validate it and you can see it. EIPDRs are going to become more and more important as you move throughout the organization, especially as we go to the advancement panels. A lot of our other panels are using the EIPDR to do a records review for selection for recruiting, for special assignments, Chiefs Academy instructor, Coast Guard Academy chiefs, and all the things that we look at for somebody's record. So EIPDR is important. I applaud you for checking in on it, and we will make it available to you so you can view your own EIPDR really soon.
That's really great news.
Yes.
Really great news. Thank you. This question is for Ms. Godfrey from Crystalline, and she asks, one of their early action items was to create a civilian career management office at FORSCOM. When will we see an actual career path laid out to guide my upward mobility within the Coast Guard?
Thanks so much for that question. I'm very excited about the civilian career management team and the work they're doing. And they are working right now with various programs to develop a career path document. And their plan is to have something in draft by February 2020. And I think that that will be very helpful to civilians, along with the rotational assignment program, Commandant instruction that we're working on, and the detailed Commandant instruction program. And when that all comes together, it will lay out career paths for civilians in the Coast Guard.
So it's coming soon. So this next question is for Master Chief from EM2 Miller. Can you touch on the new credentialing program for enlisted members?
Good question, EM2. So the Coast Guard Credentialing Opportunities Online, or CG Cool, is going to be transformative for the workforce. That will give you an opportunity to earn a civilian credential while you're performing your normal duties and getting your sea schools and working on your education. I encourage you to go to CG Cool, to search CG Cool and surf around the website. It's not fully functional right now, but it'll give you a sense of what you need to do and what credentials are available for you for your rating.
Thank you, Master Chief. Admiral, this question is from Mike Jones.
Okay.
What is the future of CSPI and diversifying the officer corps?
So CSPI, the program here to broaden diversity, it's got to remember
College Student
College Student Pre-Initiative here. We've done some pretty serious revamping of CSPI just in the last year or so. A year ago at the NNOA conference, we took a look at what are our programmatic objectives of the CSPI program, what was our results. And we were bringing in 20 plus or minus % of the students through C-SPI were coming in that were underrepresented minority students. I think today we're pushing upwards of 3/4 plus or minus of those students are underrepresented minorities coming into the service. So there's the program to bring folks in, and it's there's payment for college here. You go one summer into a Cape May-like scenario. You go to OCS your final year. You got some summer ties to a field unit out near where your college is. C-SPI has served us very well. There's also the ability to do some payback of student loans. I think it's for 2 years of the program or so. I'd double check me on the facts on that. But what I would say is, I believe C-SPI is here to stay. I believe we've got C-SPI shooting closer to the bullseye that we were aiming for in the past, but weren't necessarily being all that successful for. So we're really using C-SPI to reach a broader population of candidates to serve in our commissioned officer ranks. And I think we're on a good trajectory here moving forward.
Thank you, Admiral. So this question is for Master Chief from ET1 Fun. I understand that more information will be passed regarding the updated tattoo policy towards the end of the month. However, is there any information about the changes that could be passed today?
So basically what it's going to boil down to is in the past we used the V-neck T-shirt to disqualify potential recruits, and that was the standard that we used. And if you were serving, you couldn't do that. So we're going to go to a crew neck. We're going to allow 1 inch on the hand, and then I would encourage you to read through the policy carefully. But I think we're going to allow one ring, one finger, one tattoo on one finger of each hand below the third knuckle or whatever that. I'm not sure exactly how they say that, but it's a little bit of an expansion. We did have some folks that wanted tattoos above the neck, and they wanted some other things, but we determined that to maintain our military standards and that we serve the voting public, and we really want to project a very professional appearance. So we've started there, and we will continue to look at our tattoo policy and adjust if we need to. But I think I'm personally really happy where we ended up with the tattoo policy.
As I mentioned in my introductory remarks, towards the end of August, DCMS is going to put that guidance out. So we'll see some guidance on the body composition pilot program here immediately after today, and then the tattoo policy towards the end of August is when that'll hit the street.
So just wait for August.
That's right.
The end of August. So this is actually for all three of you. This is from PA2 Mole. What are some of the issues within the Coast Guard that keep you up at night?
You want to take the first crack at that, Master?
Sure. So I want to be sure that our families are taken care of, and that our people have what they need to be successful. I want our Coast Guard members to be focused on the mission, and so I look at readiness as a total person. Are you financially ready? Are you emotionally ready? Are you physically fit? Do you have everything you need? Do you have the tools? And are you trained to do your job? And so I look at all that from a holistic standpoint and making sure that our folks are the whole person ready to perform the mission. And so, it's part and parcel of what it is to be a Coastie. And I just want to be sure we're getting that right, and we have the resources available. With technology these days and things being more expensive, we have to really make sure we're maximizing every dollar to make sure our folks are ready.
Ms. Godfrey?
So what keeps me up at night is just making sure that we're providing the best support we possibly can to our workforce, and that actually I'm doing the best that I can to support my workforce that's providing that support. And that means through resources, through giving them the tools that they need to do the job that is utmost important to the Coast Guard as a whole. And if we do our jobs, that just makes everybody else's job in the Coast Guard and our ability to perform our missions that much easier. So it's kind of twofold, supporting my workforce, but that in turn supports the total workforce.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, I'd say, since taking over my current position, I've talked about the demand for Coast Guard services being unprecedented, and I don't think that changes anytime soon. So at the end of the day, we need to have a workforce that is properly, but first we have to recruit the right workforce. I want to recruit a workforce that's more representative of the nation we serve. We need to train that workforce to do those, frontline work that is inherently dangerous. We need to retain that workforce. We need to think about what are those things that make the Coast Guard employer choice. We talked a lot about that in some of the previous questions. It's more flexibility, it's more permeability in the workforce. And ultimately, we serve the taxpayers here. That's who pays our bills, pays our salaries at the end of the day. So we need to be responsive. I talked about a ready, relevant, responsive Coast Guard. Ready, we're focused on that. That's my number one priority in our 4-year strategic plan, and we're working hard to get some dollars to make the Coast Guard more ready and stay more ready. We've been doing pretty well on capital funding in recent years, but we've been flatlined for the good part of a decade. And I think we're starting to move the needle on some dollars to support readiness. Relevant, we've never been more relevant. That's back to the unprecedented demand for services, but we need to be relevant within our own department. We need to be relevant supporting the geographic combatant commanders. We need to be relevant to the needs of the nation. And then responsive, we see the Coast Guard, whether it's responding to hurricanes, whether it's SAR cases, you name it, our men and women bring that bias to action to get out there and do the work. I think we're seeing the mission support enterprise really doing some terrific things to enable frontline operations. So, you say, what keeps me up at night? I think I sleep pretty well because I don't think we've ever had a more talented workforce. But as I look into the crystal ball, if the Vanderhadens and Godfreys and Schultzes aren't focused on people, the world's best Coast Guard in a decade from now doesn't remain the world's best Coast Guard, because we are a human capital intensive organization. So we need to continue to bring the best and brightest in. That talented workforce has options. So if they don't say, Master Chief talked about apprentice, journeyman, sort of master type of program. We've got the highest retention of any of the armed services. We need to sort of stay at those higher levels of retention, because that marine safety technician is down there working at a liquefaction facility pushing LNG, off our shores, where a few short years ago we were importing LNG. That's a pretty smart young man or woman. I want that person to see the Coast Guard as an attractive employer, want to stay on our team. We need to keep that person on our team. So I think if something that keeps me up at night is just hitting the target with broader recruitment, making sure folks see the Coast Guard as that employer choice, and retaining the workforce to continue to do the important work the nation expects of us. It's sort of a long answer, but I think it sort of pulls together the Master Chief and Ms. Godfrey sort of thinking about people are at the center of that. Readiness is at the center of that. So I appreciate the question. It's a great question.
So what you're saying is we keep you up at night.
You and my dog on occasion. Everything that moves outside my house keep me up at night.
No, that's good. That's good. Thank you, Admiral. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Godfrey and Master Chief. So this question is for the Admiral from Brian. Good afternoon, sir. Are there any updates or intentions on the creation of a cyber rating for both active and reserve personnel? If not, are there any short-term goals to incorporate both ISs and MSTs into cyber?
So the cyber rating question, and I'm going to give Master Chief, I think, a bite at this one too. I think, there's talk about a cyber rating. Then you look at cyber. As I understand cyber, as a former Land Commander, as a former Southcom J3 that stood up a joint cyber center, cyber is a domain. It's a warfighting domain. And it's clearly sort of in the 3 operational lens a little bit. So I think it's well served by having ISs, ITs, broader ratings that feed into that, because it's not a specific, it's not a technical, narrow thing. It's a warfighting domain. So right now, I think the cyber rating, we've got to do all the puts and takes in that. We've got to watch, what the other services are doing, understand the thinking. What we've been focused on is building our basic cyber functions. We stood up Coast Guard Cyber. As of this summer, it's a standalone flag. Admiral Mike Ryan just took over, and he has no other duty except being the commander of Coast Guard Cyber. Before that, had been double-hatted with the CG6. So that's a good thing. It gets more focus. The 20 budget has more cyber bodies as we build out our first cyber protection team, the CPT. We've got our cyber battle watch here. We're really starting to understand and build out our sort of, I don't want to say IOC, it's IOC marching, interim operating capability marching to full operating capability. The conversations about the humans involved, I think those will be iterative conversations in the years to come. I would say I'm not ready yet to say it's time to go to a cyber rating. I'm not taking that off the table. I think populating, smart people from a cross-section of ratings is where I see cyber for the foreseeable future. But let me look at the sort of the leader of our enlisted workforce in that one.
So we whenever you create a rating, it has to be sustainable. It has to have upper mobility. You have to write a service-wide for it. Typically need a rating force Master Chief. You really have to you have to look at the totality. Is there enough bodies there to where you have a pyramidal growth. So we have to see what the force structure of the cyber workforce looks like, and if there's a force structure there where it's sustainable and it makes sense, I think we could put together a pretty good argument for it. But if we're creating a force structure that is not conducive to upward mobility and to growth, and then I think that potentially we could create something that makes it impossible to advance, or makes it impossible to, really narrow focused, and that's what we have to be careful about.
Lemaine, and one of the things in the cyber domain is, we created a major at our academy where 50% of our officers. 2022 is the first class of graduating cyber professionals within the major. I think we're going to have to create some permeability in that cyber workforce. Men and women that are doing cyber work, they're excited by it, they're jazzed up, they want to stay in there. We've got to figure out, can we support a specific rating, as Massey said, or does sort of you get to a certain point, you burn out, and you can't really advance your career. So I think all those things we're learning each and every day about the cyber professionals. I think we're looking at, probably more civilians in cyber here, and then that's sort of our own organic cyber to reside on the .mil DoD networks. Then there's the whole taking cyber to the waterfront. We're trying to field some cyber professionals at the sectors as they interface with industry, whether it's MITSA facility inspections, whether it's vessel security plans. So I would say we're in sort of the formative stages for the foreseeable future on cyber, and these are great conversations. We certainly welcome people's thoughts on maybe why they're championing a cyber rating. We've got to put that in the bigger scheme of the Coast Guard that recruits, retains, trains people, and then moves them up through the system so they can promote. No one wants to come in and stay at a certain level for a entire 20-year career. So we've got to make sure we can build that pyramid on the enlisted side, and then the officer side. It's hard to just pick one thing and just do that. We sort of expect our officers to have kind of an operational specialty and then a secondary track. And we've got to figure out exactly what that looks like for cyber.
Looks like there's a lot going into the decision making.
Yeah, there's a lot of good thinking. Admiral Ryan's all over that. He just came from the requirements shop. He understands it well, and I think he's going to help us think through that. So appreciate the question.
Sounds great. Thank you, Admiral Master Chief. So this question is for Master Chief from MK2 Armstrong. Good afternoon. The Air Force offers a 5-week Airman Leadership School at the E4 level that is available to a small number of Coast Guardsmen. What is the potential for the opportunity of growing the number of attendees, or for LAMs to be revamped or better suit our future Coast Guard leaders?
So MK2, we the Leadership Development Center analyzes our requirements, our leadership requirements based against the Leadership Development Framework on a fairly regular basis, and we do an organizational assessment survey, and we do different surveys that capture what we would call a needs assessment for the workforce. Perhaps it's time to look at a junior enlisted needs assessment in terms of leadership and see if our needs are being met with our current course. The Air Force has a lot more resources than we do. They have an availability to put that course on. I'm very thankful for the opportunity that we had to send our folks there, and I can promise you that we do consistently analyze what our workforce needs to be successful, and if the answer is more or expanded LAMs, then we would look to try to make that happen.
Thank you, Master Chief. I actually went to that school, and it was really incredible. It really was. But I learned at the end of the day, the leaders that are in my life are a really great example and learning experience for me.
It is a good school. I agree.
Yeah. So we have time for a few more questions.
Okay.
So our next question is for Ms. Godfrey. This question is from Andy. Can we expect any updates to the civilian performance evaluation system?
Andy, thanks for that question. So we're actually looking at two things with the civilian performance management system, and it's one of my key priorities. So the first thing that we're looking at is the development of an e-performance system. That's our next step in modernizing the HR suite. And so we're looking at various options for that e-performance system, and we'll convey more information as that becomes as that materializes. And then we're also working with DHS. They have mandated that we try to move most of our workforce to a single performance management system, which would look like the DHS performance management system versus EARS. But we're also working on the specifics of that, and we will communicate that as more information becomes available.
Thank you, ma'am. This next question is for the Admiral. From Jonathan Hezias, I apologize if I messed that up. How is the Coast Guard contributing to the joint force effort in the Indo-PACOM?
So, Jonathan, I appreciate the question. You know, kind of exciting. Today, the Joseph Gerzak, which is 110 or 154-foot fast response cutter, and the Coast Guard cutter Walnut, 225-foot buoy tender, both arrived down in American Samoa. You know, American Samoa is one of those places where we're starting to see China encroaching in the region, sort of dispensing their influence. And the thinking here with the 225 supporting the FRC, doing some fisheries enforcement with partner nations, we're lashed up with the Aussies, the Kiwis from New Zealand, is what's that alternative that looks like a people-to-people partnership. So we are taking a slightly different approach here with this surface action group, the buoy tender and the FRC. I think more of that to come in the coming months here into the next fiscal year and beyond. You know, places like the Federated States of Micronesia, the compact area down there. What we're also doing is the cutter Berthoff came back. She sailed during the shutdown in January, came back in June. She did an Indo-Pacific Commander patrol working for the 7th Fleet. She did some tremendous things, whether it was steaming alongside Navy combatants, doing the Taiwan Straits transit. She did some partnerships with the Philippines, search and rescue exercises, the Vietnamese, visited Hong Kong and other places. We bring, you know, we sort of are the face of proper, appropriate maritime governance, you know, what we call the rule-based order. I think the Coast Guard, with our iconic race and stripe deployed in that region, that's how Coast Guard should operate. We're seeing other Coast Guards in that part of the world that mimic our brand but don't mimic our appropriate behaviors here. So I think we offer an alternative to the Indo-Pacific Commander, Admiral Davidson, and his team. So we're looking at, you know, appropriate contributions at the higher end of our capabilities, NSCs, where and when we can support that at the request for forces that come from Indo-Pacific. And we're looking at some little more of that people-to-people partnership where we can work alongside the partner nations who are very concerned. Most of 50% or more of their GDP derives from the ocean, their exclusive economic zone, fish. You know, tuna out there, the pelagic species, that's a $7 billion industry. So I think there's a sweet spot for us to work on the lower end of the continuum, a little bit below the level of lethality with our national security cutter. We're trying to figure that out here, given you know, a plethora of other Coast Guard missions demanding those national security cutters and the counter-drug mission in other parts of the globe. But that's kind of where we're going in the Indo-Pacific. I don't think the demand is going to go down, and I think the Coast Guard, with our broad authorities, our strong brand, our model maritime governance, and you know, champions of rule-based order, free and open Indo-Pacific, I think that's going to remain part of the solution moving forward. The challenge is, you know, enterprise risk and how much we can afford to put in that fight with all the other things that are on our plate, Lumena.
Thank you, Admiral. So it looks like we're getting a ton of questions, so we're just going to go an extra 10 more minutes.
Okay.
So this question is from Master Chief, from Karl Schultz. With
No
blended
relation.
about to ask, with blended retirement system now in effect, how has it impacted recruiting?
I'm not tracking a difference in recruiting. I do worry about the way the blended retirement system is going to affect our retention model, but it can't be anything but a good thing. You can join the military. It used to be when you joined the military, you would serve for 4 years and potentially get out using your GI Bill, but now you have a little more flexibility over your own career. You can plan a little bit better, and if you save, if you're a good saver, you don't necessarily have to do 20 years to be able to take something with you besides your GI Bill, potentially a credential, a civilian credential, and now you'll have your blended retirement system. So I haven't actually asked the recruiters about it, but I imagine it would be nothing but a good thing. It would be positive.
Thank you, Master Chief. So this question is for Ms. Godfrey from Andy. Sorry, just a question from Andy. Can we expect any updates? Oh, sorry, excuse me, Rudy asked that question. Let me start this over real quick. Master Chief, here's
Yes.
another question for you from
Okay.
SK3 Gonzalez. Will the Type 3 uniforms be distributed to all Coast Guard members, or will a member have to use their funds to utilize these uniforms?
That's Pedro Gonzalez, great question. So the uniforms will be replacements for the current ODU. So when the current set of ODUs you have is unserviceable, when you order new ODUs from the UDC, you will receive the Type 3. Your clothing maintenance allowance will reflect your, just as you receive a clothing maintenance allowance right now, that is what you will use to purchase your new uniform. So it won't be any added out-of-pocket cost for you. The clothing maintenance allowance will still be looked at the same. It will be designed. It's designed to cover replacement costs for your uniform. So.
Actually, is there any sort of thinking on how long that phasing period will be?
So yes, Admiral. So it'll take about 18 months to get full up into the training center. So basic training in the academy, the accession sources will be full up in 18 months. In about 24 months, that's 2 years. It'll be available if you call the UDC and you request it, and then by 2023 we will have full implementation of the Type 3.
Old uniforms will go out by.
Well, until they're not serviceable.
Okay. So there's a period here where the old and new can coexist.
Yes, Admiral. Yes.
Good. And
they look similar enough that if you're in formation, you won't stand out. It won't be, it won't make you stand out. I'm optimistic this is going to be a really good thing. I want to touch on one thing real quick that I failed to mention before. We're going to keep our ball caps. The ball caps will remain the same. We will not go to an 8-point cover.
Sounds good. Thank you, Master
Thank
Chief.
you.
So, Admiral, this is a question from Sector Anchorage.
Okay.
Are there any plans to address the manpower shortages in prevention and marine inspections?
So that's a great question, and was up in Alaska last week. Did not get to Anchorage this time. Was up there last year. We are looking to build out our marine safety or prevention workforce. It's going to be iterative. I think the 20 budget has a couple dozen billets in there that get after some of the work on the prevention waterfront here. So hang tight. It's not an easy environment for growing end strength in the Coast Guard, but we've along with cyber, we've pushed prevention up to the front of that pile here. So I think specifically it's about 24 billets that we're going after this year. I mentioned before, the demand for Coast Guard services, the increasing complexity of the environment. We rolled out a maritime commerce strategic outlook back in the fall, and that really talks about the key role the Coast Guard has in enabling the prosperity of the nation. $5.4 trillion economic activity on our waters and our ports, 30 million jobs. We've got to have sufficient capacity in terms of marine safety prevention professionals, and we've got to get them the training and the skills. We're doing a complete overhaul at FORSCOM on the developmental program for our marine inspectors. So there's a lot of focus in the prevention workforce, specifically targeted at marine safety, marine inspectors. So I think there's some good news coming. Acknowledge the need for more capacity in the field, and I think we're starting to scratch at that. It probably won't come as quick as Sector Anchorage and others want it, but it's on our radar, it's a priority, and we're going to continue to lean in to position that workforce for success.
Thank you, Admiral. Another question for you, Admiral.
Okay.
And this one says, good afternoon. Chief Theresa Joyce here. I'm currently on ADOS orders and surge staffing. With the new parental leave program, Southwest Border Ops, and other contingency and non-contingency ops, are there any plans to increase reserve forces or to eliminate barriers such as the 1095 rule to allow volunteering members to continue doing so?
So let me start in the reverse order. In terms of changing the 1095, the how many days you can serve, I don't see us changing that. No real current discussions about that. What I would say in terms of reserve end strength, at one point we were authorized 10,000 reservists. We never actually filled to more than 8,100. Our authorized end strength now is 7,000. We're operating at about 6,100. I have stated on the record at congressional hearings and other places publicly, I'd like to see us get our reserve end strength over 7,000 here in the coming couple of years here. If no later than the end of my tenure at Commandant 3 years down the road. We need a reserve end strength of more than 7,000. So I think we've actually sort of stopped the bleeding a bit, and we're sort of steady state. The 20 budget proposes tuition assistance for reservists, not based on them being on active duty orders, but just being reservists. That's the first time, I think, in the history of the reserves that it's not tied to ADOS. So I think that is very much a targeted effort for, recruiting into the reserves. I hope, active duty members, if their life circumstances are such where, they're looking to leave active duty, will look at the reserves and say, hey, now I can get some tuition assistance. There's still some challenges on, if you look at the National Guard versus Coast Guard Reserve, I could drill locally at the National Guard Armory. I may have to drive, but we're hoping that, the tuition assistance for reservists, a little bit better placement, on where we position our reservists closer to where they're located. We think that's going to be helpful. So the reserve very much has my attention and that of the two area commanders. You know, we come off a couple busy hurricane seasons. We need a bigger reserve. We need a well-trained reserve. And just the last piece of that, we just moved Coast Guard Reserve into the DCO enterprise. So we are looking at the reserve program as a capability now, managing it like a capability. And I think that's going to really focus us laser sharp on what does that mean in terms of training our reserves, how many reserves, how we utilize them. So I think it's kind of a banner moment for reservists. It is very much in my wheelhouse of priorities, and that's shared by our senior listed leaders and both our active and reserve senior leaders in the officer ranks.
I've definitely worked with a lot of reservists, and they have a lot of talent, outside talent that they bring into the workforce. So this is for Master Chief from MK3 Sellers. Is there any possibility of the Coast Guard bringing back the Striker program?
Master Sellers, we right now are not looking at bringing back the Striker program. We have A schools are doing well. The ratings that allowed for a Striker program have a fairly reasonable wait list. When you go through A school, we have a benchmark of your knowledge. We know everybody's getting the same education, everybody's getting the same training, and that really helps further on in your career in terms of being eligible for the doing well in the service wide, and it starts you off with a common foundation of knowledge. So we have not talked about bringing back the Striker program. It is, if we needed more people than we could put through A school, which could happen in the future. We're going to grow. The Coast Guard's going to grow in the future. If we get to a point where we can't keep up, we could look at a Striker program. It probably won't look the same. Force Comm and DCMS is working on a kind of a hybrid program but it still would be closer to an A school, closer to a school than it would a Striker program.
Thank you, Master Chief. So we have one more question, and this is directed to the Admiral. Admiral, from Kyle Smith, what steps has the service taken to avoid pay and operational impacts in the event of another government shutdown?
Well, Kyle, let me compliment you and your Coast Guard shipmates and our Coast Guard families for weathering what was a very difficult situation last year. You know, the partial federal government shutdown of 35 days, which really felt a lot more like, closer to 8 weeks than 5 weeks, because it was the anxiety going in, the anxiety coming out. So I appreciate just how our Coast Guard men and women continued to stand the watch, and how our families stood in their corner, how our civilian employees who wanted to be at work but were furloughed without pay accepted civilians that came in. There were some folks that came in, that worked here and just did extraordinary things. I think what we saw, was the nation embrace the Coast Guard. They understood the Coast Guard at a level they didn't before. They understood the value. They understand, I think, today better than they did yesterday, that we are part of the armed forces, one of the 5 armed forces. What are we doing? There is not a conversation that I have here in Washington that doesn't focus on, something that sounds like pay our Coast Guard Act or provisions inside the authorization bill. As I alluded to earlier, just got back from a trip to Alaska with the senior members of our Appropriations Committee on the House. That was the chairwoman, her ranking counterpart. We talked a lot about this. She heard it from frontline Coast Guards when we did all hands on the deck of the Coast Guard cutter Healy. We did all hands on the deck of the Air Station Kodiak hangar there, which had a few hundred people. So political leadership understands the angst, moving forward here in 2019 as we talk about a 2020 budget. The Coast Guard authorization bill in the Senate coming out of the committee, Mark, includes a provision for pay our Coast Guard. The House bill that was voted out last week had a provision. It came out through some sort of Congressional Budget Office stuff, that sort of Washington stuff, but it fell out of there. So we're going to continue to try to include that moving forward. I've talked to the chairman of the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee, which oversees us from an authorizing standpoint, Chairman DeFazio. He remains committed to trying to get that kind of provision out there. So I would say this, the shutdown was tough on America. 800,000 federal employees, including our Coast Guard team, went without pay. I'm not so sure the nation wants to politically repeat that. The good news is the Senate just voted out a bipartisan budget agreement here before they went on recess. The House did it a week before. We now have an agreement on the level of funding for defense discretionary funding, and then non-defense discretionary funding. That sets the table for the 12 appropriations committees to sit down and start to do their work here a little bit. So I'm guardedly optimistic that there'll be a different level of conversation. Or that said, we're keeping our foot on the gas here in the nation's capital to try to advance something that looks like a Pay Our Military Act for the Coast Guard. And we will not back down on that until basically we've rooted out all potential pathways there. So we're committed to it. I'm guardedly optimistic. Hopefully there's not a repeat of last year. But to the men and women in the field, I say this everywhere I go, we will not back down on our resoluteness to try to advance this to make sure the Coast Guard is not left outside the other 4 armed services when it comes to pay here in 2020.
Thank you, Admiral.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions. This concludes, but did you guys have any final remarks? You three, did you have any final remarks?
I'd just like to thank Ms. Godfrey for coming out. She does an exceptional job advocating for our civilian workforce within the human resources world here. So thank you, Michelle, and to Master Chief Vanderhaden, our 13th MCPOCG. He just does a tremendous job advocating for our men and women in uniform in our enlisted ranks and broader across the service. So I hope this was responsive to the men and women of the Coast Guard. We look forward to the next town hall. If we didn't get to your questions today, my apologies, but we'll look forward to kind of getting this on a little more predictable battle rhythm. We said that last time. We had the shutdown. We're about 3-4 months beyond where we ideally like to do this, but I think maybe a quarterly battle rhythm will probably be our target going forward. So thanks for your terrific questions today. They got us thinking. We'll go back, make sure we're responsive on our answers. If there's anything we need to clean up a little bit, we'll try to figure out how to best disseminate that information. And thank you, Lumena, for moderating today's session.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you, Admiral, Master Chief, and Ms. Godfrey. So this concludes our virtual town hall.